The Titanic is a very powerful case study because it's most people know of the disaster, the 4 days of the maiden voyage preceding the disaster, but there's a much bigger story. The story really goes back about 5 years, and when you actually look at this whole story, so you look at it holistically, you look at the project, you start to see very important lessons that can be transcribed back to today and how projects go wrong. Today's world is full of project failures, and project failures happen all the time. 25% of projects end up being cancelled because they just aren't going in the right direction. So it's important for today's business world to understand why projects fail, and the Titanic is a very powerful case study of that. The roots of the failure really started with the start of the project itself, in terms of the design, and as the project proceeded there was a whole series of mistakes that were made, and this is what makes this story so fascinating, is that most people associate the disaster to operational reasons when the project went into implementation, but in fact the root causes were from day one as they were designing. Now, there was a project mantra at the time to build a luxurious liner, and that proceeded over everything. So there was almost a competition. If anything came up against that particular mantra, it was pushed down by the stakeholders. So the stakeholders rode roughshod over the architects who were trying to design certain features that met certain standards. And as the project proceeded, there was basically two ships. There was the Olympic that was built in parallel. Now, the Olympic was launched prior to the Titanic, and the Olympic ran into a number of quite serious problems. It had a collision with the HMS Hawke, and that collision threw the whole of Titanic's project into a spin, because they had to repair the Olympic to get her back into service, and as a result of that they basically compromised on certain phases within Titanic's project. So they compromised on the actual testing. There was no testing that was done. There was no sea trials that effectively took place. So effectively what happened was the Titanic's maiden voyage was not only a voyage to meet the expectations of a media which was anticipating the launch, but also the expectations of 53 millionaires, and it was also the maiden voyage where they hadn't properly tested the ship, so they ended up doing a lot of the testing in the early days of the maiden voyage. So all these things combined together led to the disaster. What we try and do with lessons from history is look at the bigger picture. We try and look at the whole of the project preceding it beforehand and bring really important information to play. Titanic would have failed regardless of the time frame because of the project itself, right? So if they'd launched it a month earlier, it would have still failed, as it would have ended up in a disaster, because there were so many things that were set against it in terms of what had gone wrong. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to show the fact that projects have a chance of failing, quite a high chance, about 25%. And how do you prevent that? How do you prevent that in today's world? Well, you can look back at this case study and try and avoid some of the pitfalls that they encountered as they were going through this particular project.
Senior executives with planemaker EADS were reportedly told 5 years ago about potential bribes to Saudi Arabian officials. The alleged scandal, now being investigated by Britain's Serious Fraud Office, involved a €2.7 billion contract awarded to an EADS subsidiary, GPT. The Financial Times says a financial controller with GPT alerted his superiors in 2007. He was concerned about lavish gifts given to the Saudi royal family and military, as well as payments to offshore bank accounts. GPT provides communications and intranet services for the Saudi National Guard, which protects the kingdom's royal family.